Evening viewer, looking at my 28mm ancient Greek collection. I'm going to try and make these videos a bit shorter, so I'm going to split the 28mm collection into smaller, hopefully bite-sized chunks. Before we do a quick scan over, we're looking at roughly, or as best as I can tell, 352 foot figures, 32 cavalry figures, and 18 command. My ancient Greek collection I consider largely complete. This was my first venture into the world of ancients. Now, take your travel sickness tablets and we'll try and do a bit of a flyover. Okay, now at the front, in the what I call the march attack pose, is the later what I call Peloponnesian War Greeks. Now in ancients, a fair amount of debate, as I've mentioned before. Some would argue that by the time of the Peloponnesian War, that the Greeks had done away completely with their armour. Others would say, no. That armour was still very much in vogue. I, of course, have taken the middle ground. Well, let's face it, folks, we're getting very pedantic over a few bits of pottery and some tomb inscriptions, really. Who knows for sure? But I've taken the middle ground. The front ranks of the later Greeks. That's these four here and these four over there. The front ranks have got some sort of armour on, and then the rear rank is unarmoured. Subtle differences that may not be immediately apparent looking at this video, and apologies for the light, by the way, but there are subtle differences. Those of you eagle-eyed can probably easily spot that Spartans in the back there with the Pylos helmet. I actually think that probably the majority of Greeks, by the time the Spartans were wearing the Pylos helmet, most of the other Greeks were too, tend to follow fashion. But it seems to be almost de rigueur that you show other Greeks in the older Corinthian type helmets. These, every second one here is in a later Attic, i.e. Athenian helmet. And over here on the front, you've got blokes in the front with Theban helmets. Not sure about that. I think there was definitely worn by the cavalry. Not sure that the infantry ever wore them, but what you going to do? And then in the back, the rear too, you can see, that one there, excuse my arm. You can see they're wearing almost Macedonian. I think they're described as a Thracian helmet. So there are subtle differences. The first ever Greeks that I ever painted, they hang onto your stomachs, we're going flying. These dudes, now these are the early Greeks. These are the Greeks of Thermopylae, Marathon, etc. Greek light cavalry. I don't think they had any heavy cavalry at that stage. I could be wrong. Over here you can see the Spartans of the earlier period. So even here there's some debate. Some say the Spartans only wore the brass armour. Others say, no, they only wore the linothorax. Linothorax, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Interesting here, I'll just go down, of course, skirmishers and, slingers, archers, usual sort of thing, with commanders on round basis. Interesting little point here. These guys here. Originally, I based my units for Hail Caesar, but later on, I still like Hail Caesar, but I've switched to rules like Sword and Spear and even L'Art de la Guerre. Less figures needed, etc., etc. These guys originally, they were meant to be what's called runners out. When the Greeks first faced people like the Thracians and hill tribes, they had an awful lot of trouble because the light infantry would just throw their rocks and spears and whatever else at the hoplites, who, if they tried to give chase, couldn't catch them. So the Greeks came up with the idea of what they call runners out, more lighter armed men who would come running, sort of like an early form of peltast, I suppose, I don't know, that seems to fit their role. These guys would break off from the phalanx and they would be able to chase down the harassing, put my tongue back in, light infantry. So that was the original idea behind them. These days they just form a unit of, I don't know, militia type hoplites or medium hoplites, whatever you want to call them. Can always go back and incorporate them into the phalanxes. Anyway, one last flyover and we'll call it quits there. As I say, in terms of what needs to be done unpainted, there's not really anything per se. I've got this Alexander figure. Now, I have got an Alexander figure for my Macedonian army from Foundry, but he's the one with the helmet on. So I thought I might just paint this fella as a slightly less glamorous figure, and he could do as my cavalry commander, because I don't actually have a proper cavalry commander for my Greeks. It looks a bit weird having two infantry figures on a round base commanding cavalry. So that's the story there. I suspect these two actually belong to my Macedonian army, which we'll look at in due course. I think they're a command for that. These figures here are actually, they are from Greece. They're sort of paper stoppers. As you can see, I'm in various stages of working on them. I probably haven't touched them for several years. I haven't got round to creating bases for my Greeks, and I thought sort of a temple situation. Athena, obviously, Athens. Something like that on a, what do you call it, a baggage or a supply base or whatever, various rules seem to like. So yeah, I'm not going to include those in to be painted. As I say, I'm pretty happy with this lot there, to all intents and purposes done. I have got these 8 figures here, which I'm not exactly sure what to do with. I'm just keeping them as a spare, as I say, in L'Art de la Guerre or even DBA or something like that. That's a unit. So, all right, let's call it quits there. So that's the ancient Greeks. I suppose if there was anything I'd like to do with them, the basing is fairly rudimentary. As you'll compare with my later Macedonians and later Achaemenid armies, perhaps go back and put a few tufts and whatever else on there. But as I say, 352 infantry, 32 cavalry, 18 commanders, all painted up and based. Thank God. Okay, on to the next.